So one of the things that we're going to start with is again, kind of situating ourselves in the space, and we're going to do a little activity. It's called a mini triz. For any folks who do facilitation, this is what's called. It comes out of a liberating structure, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question. And I'll forewarn you that when I ask the question, you're going to think that you misheard me, but I'm going to tell you that you heard me right the first time. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask this question, and then we're going to have folks, you could just come off mute and just give your answer. We'll just be kind of collecting them. I'll be kind of writing them down, and you'll get the point as we go through. All right? So this is the question. What is necessary to make sure everyone, not just some, feel unsafe? So what is necessary to make sure everyone, not just some, feel unsafe? So feel free to just come off mute and just share what comes to mind.
Violence.
Constant surveillance.
Yeah.
Unlawful policing.
Hatred.
Go ahead.
I'm with the surveillance too.
How about a feeling of helplessness?
A divided
being
government
poor would make anyone feel unsafe.
compromise.
I'm sorry. So two people were trying to go at once. I heard divided government, people unwilling to compromise.
Inconsistency.
Misuse of biometrics.
Tracking of daily activities.
I think not having access to the things you need, like housing and food, that's going to make people feel unsafe.
Being gaslighted.
I would say terrorism and war.
Sometimes it's as simple as a lack of lighting at night.
I'll add feeling unseen. Any other thoughts? This is a pretty good list. I think I wrote down pretty fast in my handwriting here. I see. Oh, someone's capturing things: food insecurity, housing, government propaganda, lack of accountability. Wonderful. So then I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking, how many of these things do we actually have in place now in our communities? Are people being gaslighted? Well, I mean, I would probably say yes. There was somebody said unlawful policing. I guess there probably could be a conversation about what that exactly means. But I'm sure that people would say that we would see that that's happening. Violence, we know that that's happening. I was just reading a neighborhood association website the other day that was talking about something where when you go on vacation, you can have the police check up on your house. And I was like, you mean they're just gonna roll through the neighborhoods just to check on your house while you're on vacation? That to me means they could just be, that's constant surveillance to me. That's just one example of what that could look like. I just wanna pull that up. Helplessness, people said. And we know that we have terrorism and war happening. So we know that right now we are currently living during a time where we are experiencing extreme amounts of unsafety, right? Some of us might feel more safe than others of us in spaces. But one of the things that I'll say drew me to this effort is wanting to center things that help to create a community where we can all feel safe. And that I believe that that is possible, that it is possible for all of us to feel safe where we live and wherever we go, right? Not just where we live, but where we work, where we recreate, that we can feel safe as we move across the invisible borders of our communities, of our cities, of our states, of countries. That I do believe that that is possible. And so we need to think about then, if we agree, that we can't let this be our story, right? That we need to go the opposite way. And so tonight we're going to be here to address one of these areas that can sometimes be sold to us as a measure of safety, but that we know is the opposite, right? Just like what the miniaturist teaches us, shows us that sometimes when we think about the opposite, we can actually get closer to the truth of what it is that we want to see. And so we're going to stop and just take a look at a video that's going to help to ground us in terms of thinking about facial recognition technology. It's a video that was done by the ACLU that is representing someone who was, I think now the second maybe person who was wrongly identified.
So when we get to the interview room, the first thing they had me do was read my rights to myself and then sign off that I read and understand my rights. A detective turns over a picture of a guy inside Shinola and he's like, "So that's not you?" I look, I said, "No, that's not me." He turns another paper over, he said, "I guess this not you either." I picked that paper up and hold it next to my face. I said, "This is not me." I was like, "I hope y'all don't think all black people look alike." And then he says, "The computer says it's you. Your nose is red and your lips is red." Say ah. You got a tooth coming in.
No.
Yeah, you do. Your tooth tastes like pineapples. At that time, no. I didn't know that they used any type of facial recognition or anything like that until talking with the detectives who showed me that that's what they used to apprehend me, if that's the right word. In the morning, everybody gets dressed, everybody gets ready. Lissa leaves and takes Rosie to my mother-in-law's. And then I drop Juju off to school. It's just a boring Thursday, right? We're on the phone with Lissa around 4. So then my line clicks. I click over. I'm like, "Hello." The guy's talking like he knows me. He's Robert. And I'm like, "Who is this?" "You need to come down and turn yourself in." "Who is this?" "Officer, somebody from the 3rd precinct. And I need to turn myself in for what?" So he's like, "I can't tell you that." I'm like, "Then I can't come down." "Well, if you come down, it'll be much easier on you. You don't want us to come out to your job, do you?" At this point, I think it's a prank call. So I'm like, "Look, man, if you want me, come get me, I'll be at home. Bring a warrant." And I hang up on him.
My mom got home with Rosie and we were walking through, and as I was walking through, I looked out and the cop car was outside, and I said, "Oh, so it wasn't a prank call. There really are people here." They came to the door. I answered it, and they kind of stuck their foot in the door and said, "Send Robert out." And I said, "He's not here." And they said, "We just saw him come out of that van." And I said, "That was my mom. He's not here."
I'm just like, this will probably be over when I get there. It's got to be a mistaken identity or something. I don't know why Detroit police are at my house in Farmington Hills. I pull in the driveway here, pull up in my regular spot. hop out. By the time I close the door, the car is in the driveway blocking me in. And they parked this way, across my driveway, as if I'm gonna back out or something and try to take off.
As soon as he shut the door, they were right on him. And I was in here still because I had the girls. And I tried to tell Julia to wait here and Rosie to wait here while I was going to go outside. And of course, they didn't want to do that because they were confused. They could tell something was not right. And they were already starting to cuff him by the time we get out there.
I was completely shocked and stunned to be arrested in broad daylight in front of my daughter, in front of my wife, in front of my neighbors. I can't really put it into words. It was one of the most shocking things I ever had happen to me.
He could have been killed if he would have resisted, being a black man, being arrested, or having any encounter with the police. It could go badly. And that is something that we worry about in the black family when someone has an encounter with the police.
Some detectives came to see me. They took me out of the cell and to an interview room. And then they was like, would you like to make a statement? And I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. Guy says, if you don't sign off saying that you want to make a statement, we can't give you any information. So I signed to say I'm going to make a statement. He laid the papers out on the table. And at that time, I was still guilty in their eyes until the pictures don't match. And they left them on the table and they looked at each other like, oops. It says, this is used only for investigative purposes and not to arrest. I already have a rose. You're the rosebud. Oh no, Rose, you taste like chicken.
I taste like pineapple.
Hey, Julia. Julia, do you know why Daddy got arrested?
Because I looked that up on the computer.
Remember that when we was outside? I said they made a mistake and I'll be right back. I wasn't right back, though, was I?
We didn't think this could happen. We didn't think it was a thing. Even with me following the facial recognition news and how it was being used, I didn't ever expect the police to show up at our doorstep and arrest my husband. So I just feel like other people should know that it can happen and it did happen and it shouldn't happen.
If he'd have just brought the picture with him, he could have looked it up and down and he could have left and said, oh, my bad. I didn't mean to bother you.
To have my girls out there and seeing that was, their first interaction with the police. And for that to be what it was, to them taking their dad, like, we're always going to wonder now, how much did this affect them? How much do they think about it? How much did they told their friends, their teacher? Like, I don't know what's happening in the 5-year-old mind or the 2-year-old mind, what they saw and how they're processing it.
I don't even know what it's worth to not be arrested in front of your children. Like, what's that worth to you?
It's already done. The damage is already done with my family, how it ever affected my girls. I like to think my husband's a strong person, but nobody should want to go sit in a detention center for 30 hours, whatever it was.
They need to get their evidence right before they come and arresting anyone. Black, white, brown, red, just anyone. But they really need to get their evidence right as far as the false facial recognition, because someone could be locked up or hurt or killed that's innocent.
Line them up. Bang, bang, bang. There you go. Get up there. They just pulling pictures from everywhere, matching you up from anywhere from social media to, I guess if you're in the background of a picture and it's a clear picture of you, they can use that. And it obviously doesn't work.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump into our panelists now, coming off that video. So I'm going to welcome on our panelists. We have Phil Mayer with the ACLU Michigan. We have Nathan Nash Sheard with Electronic Frontier Foundation. And then we also have John Sloan III with Black Lives Matter Detroit. And so what we're going to do is each panelist will have about 3 minutes to introduce yourself and to share what safety means to you and to us. And then we'll have a conversation with some questions that I shared ahead of time, and then we'll have time for question and answer. For folks who, if you have questions that come up, don't feel like you have to hold it. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. We will be gathering questions to ask throughout, and then we'll ask them at the end. And so again, if folks can go ahead and go off screen while we go through the panel conversation, that would be great. And make sure you're muted. And I'm gonna go ahead and have John kick us off.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be able to be here. I'm thankful to be able to have this opportunity to talk with all of you. Again, my name is John Sloan. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm one of the lead organizers for the Detroit chapter of Black Lives Matter. I'm also in leadership with another organization called the Detroit Safety Team. And so there's a really interesting intersection when we start thinking about what safety means, what safety looks like. If you have any curiosity about either organization, you can just hop online, jump on the website. I encourage you to do so because there's a lot of misinformation and purposeful disinformation out there about BLM, about the movement for Black Lives. And there's a lot of stuff that could get cleared up if you just read what we have, right? What exists. And you can ask us any questions and feel free to reach out to us. What does safety mean to me? When people talk about safety, they talk about a lot of different things. And I think if you remove the concept of policing from that question and you ask somebody what it means to make them safe, you're going to hear a lot of the converse to answers that folks were giving earlier, right? Consistent access to food, consistent access to water, comfort in my neighborhood and knowing my community members. The ability to know that my children, the youth in my community, have consistent and equitable access to educational resources. The knowledge that I am not going to be profiled by individuals that I work with, individuals that I interact with on a regular basis. Thank you, Ryan, for that. The redefinesafety.org, that's the DST website in the chat. I appreciate you. And so when we start talking about what it means to feel safe, like I started my life journey as an artist and as a musician, and I still write. And so the ability to express myself, self-expression without bias, self-expression without judgment, I think becomes really, really important to everyone, to however you identify as an individual and within part of your community. What is difficult for us when we start talking about that in relationship to surveillance and in relationship to policing. I heard somebody earlier mention unlawful policing. In my opinion, the current state of policing in this country is unlawful. So I don't know that for me, at least, there's a point in using the first one to qualify the second. I think the way in which we address each other, the way in which we relate in our communities means centering safety with the community members, means individuals being in charge of deciding what safety looks like for us, for me in my house, for me in my block, for me in my street, for me in my community. And that means being free from the way in which implicit bias is interwoven into the fabric of this culture. There's one kind of essential question that I think about that I want everybody to consider, and I have a tendency to talk for a long time, so please tell me to shut up, Desiree, if you need to. It's that, is this system broken? And for me, the answer is no. This system is doing exactly what it was built and designed to do. This current system of policing and surveillance is doing exactly what it was built and designed to do in the maintenance of a social order. We can talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about, a history of policing and that route from in the South from slave patrols and how that kind of came together during the Great Migration in the North with the criminalization of Black and brown bodies and how the current system of policing exists. But in order to feel safe, we need to remove ourselves. We need to extricate ourselves from the idea that that this system needs reformation, and really embrace the idea that the system needs to be rebuilt. If you have a plant that is rotten at the root, you don't think about still eating the fruit that plant bears. You pull it out of the ground and you start over. And so when people think about what it means to divest, people think about what it means to tear down systems of surveillance. I want people to think about the foundation upon which this is built. So I'm going to be quiet now and leave the rest of the panelists some opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Nash?
Thank you, and thanks for sharing that so much, John. And yeah, so I am Nash. I'm the Associate Director of Community Organizing at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And what that means is I lead a team that organizes what we call the Electronic Frontier Alliance, which is a network of 80 grassroots community student-led groups around the country, including Crypto Party Ann Arbor in Ann Arbor. And EFF, so for folks that aren't aware, EFF is a 30-year-old nonprofit organization. Our tagline is, protecting your rights in the digital world. So when I think about, what is safety, it's a huge question, right? And it's a huge question, and it's different depending on the context, right? Like what I consider safety when I'm driving down the street with my family is very different than what I consider safety when I go to an amusement park, right? And similarly, safety around, for me as a Black man, what that means in America, what that means what it means as an activist, what it means as a community organizer, those are all different things as well, right? As a Black man in America, safety would mean the ability to walk around my community, to walk my dog, to go into a store without the fear that my existence will be seen as a threat, and someone will take an action that could end that. Right, as an activist, the ability to join in voice and community and take action to lift up the needs of my community without fear that the actions that I'm taking, like that First Amendment protected activity that I'm engaged in, will be used in ways that could harm my ability to feed myself and to live indoors. I've worked in communities, before I started with the EFF, I was one of the co-founders of the Black Movement Law Project. And I can tell you that, in one particular instance in Cleveland, where, as after the Brello verdict, and there were, 80 people that were arrested, and their charges were ultimately dismissed because they were engaged in First Amendment activity, and the police had corralled them without giving them proper notice. And the longer story, but I'll break to the point where one particular individual that was arrested, and again, remember, his charges were ultimately dismissed, but the law enforcement went to the place that he was working at and told and informed his employer that he was engaged in a protest, and as a result, he lost his job. Right, and so maybe the opportunity to maintain his home, his opportunity to contribute to his family, that is a loss of safety. Right, and so and within the context of the work that I do at EFF, and being able to protect the ability for folks to innovate, to create, to express themselves to whoever will listen without fear of government or corporate surveillance. And so really safety, safety is a huge question, but at the end of the day, it lies in our ability to engage in society and engage in community without fear that our actions will be unduly met with punishment or repression. So thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Phil Mayer, Senior Staff Attorney at the ACLU of Michigan. In that capacity, I've been representing Robert Williams, whose video we all just saw for a little over a year now. I don't know about anybody else. I still can't watch that video without tearing up as I think about what he and his family have been through. We've been representing them for some time in an attempt to get the Detroit police to do something in response to his situation by dialing back their use of this technology. That hasn't happened. They've doubled down and reinvested in it this past summer. And recently, as a result of the failure to make headway that way, Mr. Williams has, we've assisted Mr. Williams along with the Civil Rights Litigation Initiative at the University of Michigan's clinic in filing a lawsuit against the city of Detroit. So we'll be continuing to pursue this and ensure that this family gets justice and that the Detroit police are held accountable for what they've done. On the security question, John and Nash are hard acts to follow. And I didn't hear a word that I would disagree with. I mean, I guess when I think about the question of what safety is to me, it's mostly echoing what's already been said, but I think there's sort of three pillars. There's the things you need for to be economically safe, housing, education, a job, a safety net when that fails. The second pillar is for the government to be a source of nurture rather than oppression, which is part of getting the first thing right, and really it's part of getting all of the things right. To see the government as stepping in when there is a role to help overcome collective action problems and to provide resources that we all need to thrive, and not to do so when it constitutes oppression. And the third pillar is for the government to treat people equally, which we are a long way from in this country, and in particular when it comes to policing in our criminal legal system and surveillance. And really built into all three of those pillars is the need not to be surveilled and tracked. That's not what a nurturing government does. That's not something that helps protect our economic well-being. And it's certainly not something, at least in our society as currently structured, that has any chance of promoting equal treatment. So that is what I think about when I think about safety and the issues that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks for that. So many things to jump into with you three. So I'm going to just kick us off with a general question for folks who might even be new to this issue, and just thinking about what are the problems with facial recognition, and how can the technology be discriminatory? Because it's technology, right?
I'll jump in first. So on the question about how can a technology be discriminatory, there's really two ways that is so with facial recognition and with other sort of automated algorithms in general. The first one is that they are often racist in their creation, and with facial recognition, that's the case because facial recognition works by you match a target face against a whole database of other faces. And all of the facial recognition tools that are currently in use were originally trained on databases that consisted disproportionately of white faces. As a result, they learned to better identify white faces. And they, to this day, are as much as 100 times less accurate in identifying faces of color. So that's sort of one way, is that in constructing the technology, all sorts of assumptions and selections about who's included, about who's used, get built in, and you get a bad result. But the second way is how the technology is then deployed. We don't see facial recognition for the most part being deployed, or really most new and experimental technologies being deployed first against the people in our society who feel the most safe and secure already. We see it being deployed against those who do not. Surveillance, as John talked about, our entire police history in this country is built on surveillance of especially Black and brown bodies and poor communities as well, and that is who this technology gets used against. So that's the sort of second way that I think racism creeps into the use of the tech, not just creeps, but is in fact a fundamental assumption of the technology is who it's deployed against. Because frankly, if it was deployed against everybody in the same ways, it wouldn't be tolerated, just as our drug laws wouldn't have been tolerated for the past century if they had been deployed equally against all people.
And I'll jump in and so kind of build on what Phyllis has laid out already. We looked at, someone mentioned earlier, coded bias, and so Joy Bolamwini, Dr. Timnit Gebru, Deb Raji did an amazing job of really laying out the bias that is built into the algorithm, right? So we know that from their studies at MIT, especially Joy Bolamwini's work at MIT, the three technologies, the three brands of the technology that they utilized, the error rate for white men was less than 0.8%, or the maximum error rate was 0.8%, right? Whereas for darker skinned women, it was 34.7%, right? And that, again, as Phil mentioned, that is as a result of the biases that are built into the designing of the technology, by inherent biases that we bring with us, right? Our technology is not It does not exist in a vacuum. It's designed by people. And that's why, you know, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has identified that face surveillance technology built in the United States has a far higher error rate for misidentifying Asian folks and misidentifying darker skinned folks than the technology that was built in China, right? And vice versa for the error rate for white males versus technology built in China. And so that's a concrete sign of that there's something that went into that. There's something that went into the design. But we really have to think, you know, would the technology, if that error rate wasn't there, right? Is that what we want to do? Is really the goal to just eliminate the error rate and then everything will be fine? And I would argue that the answer there is definitely no. And not only for, well, we'll start with one of the reasons that Phil already mentioned. One is because technology is, again, it's just a tool, right? And so if we're using it in a policing system that is inherently biased, we're using it, training it with materials that have, mugshot databases that are disproportionately filled with Black and brown faces, right? Then it's going to be used that way. And then if it's good, you know, similarly to, you know, we have police officers that are working in a paradigm where they are trying to fulfill their own biases, their own the beliefs that they bring in as members of society. We all have these beliefs. Is the difference around what makes something racist and what makes something biased is the power behind it, right? And policing is filled with a remarkable and stunning amount of power and unfortunately also remarkable and stunnable lack of accountability and we've seen far too many times. But let's take those away and say, you know, we're able to manage those things. There's also the idea that it's face surveillance technology, its use at all, even if it was 100% accurate, even if, you know, it was used without bias on behalf of the technicians behind it. There's still the idea that for us to be able to be monitored at scale, covertly, as we go to protest, as we go to medical clinics, as we walk down the street with our romantic partners, that will fundamentally change the way that we engage in society. You know, there's a few years ago, the NYPD following September 11th was wrongly monitoring the Muslim community, and there were studies that in New York and New Jersey, and there were studies that were done around, you know, what was the impact of that undue surveillance on those communities, and it changed the way people spoke to each other, even about things that had nothing to do with politics, because it will inherently change the way that we engage with each other in society, and the likelihood that for far too many activities that are, if they're not within the norm. The idea, you know, I can tell you as an activist myself, one of the first protests I went to, I didn't necessarily agree with what the protest was about. Actually, I mean, ultimately I did, but I didn't go there because I knew that I absolutely agreed with it. I went because I wanted to find out what it was about. I wanted to hear what their ideas were. I wanted to hear, exchange thoughts and ideas with people who might challenge my own belief system, right? But if I know that I have a fear that if I go into that space, I'll be identified in a certain way, that it could potentially have a larger impact on my ability for future employment and other potential impacts, what is my likelihood to even be able to engage and with people who have new ideas and thoughts that might help me grow? It'll be chilled, it'll be diminished. And so even if the technology worked 100% accurately, it would still be its impact on our society, its impact on our community, its impact on our neighbors, on our friends, and the people that we care about would still be too harmful for us to embrace.
There's not a whole lot more I can say that the other two panelists didn't already cover. What I would offer is the idea that technology, that data in and of itself has no bias, that it's pure because it's ones and zeros written down on a page. I think both Phil and Nash have alluded to and started talking about, is incorrect. Right. There's Dr. Rua Benjamin out of Princeton does a lot of great work in this area too, and talking about how this bias is and data bias comes from individuals and comes from what we learn and how we understand our intersectionality. And so me as a cisgendered heterosexual man, I have bias. I have implicit bias, but I participate in the systems of patriarchy and heteronormativity. I don't necessarily have power in that if I don't have the ability to exercise that power over other people. But when you start layering the history of this country and the systems that are endemic to the way that we function on top of that, and then you layer my implicit bias on top of that, right? And then you put me in power and in charge of systems of policing, or you give me authority. Police Chief James Craig talks about the error rate for I saw somebody smile, James Craig. I saw somebody smile because he's a really interesting individual in the way that he acknowledges that surveillance is inaccurate. So, right. So we're talking about Project Greenlight that's in downtown Detroit, and he acknowledges the error rate. What he also does then is he puts people in charge of trying to correct that system. What we've already outlined is that we already have our own biases. So now you're layering an error rate on top of the implicit bias of a person in general. And all of these things come down to this idea of the criminalization. So none of these things are solutions to a larger problem. All of these things are Band-Aids. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a park bench that has armrests in the middle of it. Okay. Those park benches that have armrests in the middle of it are there for what reason? They're there to keep people from laying down on the bench. Well, who inherently lays down on park benches on a regular basis? Houseless individuals. So the solution that somebody saw wasn't to help fix why this person doesn't have a house. It wasn't to help fix the economic insecurity underneath. It was to keep people away and to try to keep people from loitering in that way. And surveillance, to me, approaches this problem of safety in the very same way. It's not actually about keeping people safe. It's about maintaining social order and hierarchy.
I love that. You already answered my half question, which was, because a lot of times when folks talk about things, they're like, oh, you just need to keep practicing. We just needed to get better at recognizing all these different faces, and then it'll be good, right? But that you all already spoke to, how that's like a false kind of way, a trap to fall into, right? Because that doesn't solve for the actual issue in terms of the safety aspect, right? Just if it works better. And so thanks for that. Another question I have, when thinking about, there's all these different kind of areas and groups, or thinking about like what level of government, right, can be adopting facial recognition technology. And so, we know that the state police has it, right? But then here we're working on a ban at the local municipal level. So when thinking about some of what you all have laid out, why might municipalities adopt facial recognition? What are some of the reasons that you've heard that they give? And why is it growing?
I think if I can start, dovetailing on the last point that I made, part of the reason that I think municipalities adopt facial recognition software is because there's an inherent misframing of the concept of safety. Right. So first of all, I would like us to delineate between the ideas of safety and security. Those are two different things. And the way that we also talk about policing is also separate and apart from that, right? I was on a panel the other day and somebody said, well, we need the police. And I said, no, we need to be safe. We need safety. And those two things aren't correlative. For a lot of people, they're not correlative. I think part of the reason people and municipalities buy into that is because what they're buying into is this fallacy that they need to keep people away, that there is a criminal element in their community that they needed to be protected from. And we're not addressing any of the inequities that might cause what I would identify, people talk to identify about as broken windows policing, right? Where they start going after small crimes to try to increase those conviction rates, as you would see in Detroit, as you've seen in New York as examples. When we can start to break down the separation between businesses and community members, when we can start to create more inclusive environments, then we can start to make sure that people feel like they're all a part of that same space. They're all part of that same community. And the way in which we criminalize each other, I think thereby begins to reduce. We push ourselves away from this idea that there's this element from which we need to be protected, and push ourselves towards this idea that if we can come together as a community, that we can build out safety collectively and together.
And I think another reason that police are taking on these tools, and not just face surveillance, all like a plethora of surveillance tools, is because it's big business, right? And there's vendors that are going and actively, pursuing law enforcement officials and leaders and saying, hey, we have the solution to, cutting down the time it takes your officers to solve this crime. At the end of the day, though, I actually had a conversation recently with the district attorney here in San Francisco, Chase Sabudin, who's a progressive district attorney. His parents were both in the Weather Underground, and we were having a conversation around this idea of a violation of a community control over police surveillance ordinance that we have here in San Francisco, which requires that law enforcement have a use policy, have a disparate impact report, have like the local legislative body, the city council has a process from hearing through the public around before they adopt a new surveillance technology, right? And the SFPD had violated that. We were talking about, you know, these violations of these different types of surveillance equipment. And, you know, one of the questions that came up in the conversation was around his position on surveillance and had it been helpful, and you know, did he think that we need more surveillance? And ultimately what he said, and I think that, you know, I think it jives with a lot of what I think John and Phil have shared already, is that surveillance doesn't create safety. Surveillance largely is a tool of incarceration, right? It will help you put people in jail if it, you know, at its best, right? But it doesn't create safety. Safety and safety comes from making sure that people have the resources that they need, whether it be mental health resources, whether it be housing resources, whether it be food resources, whether it be education resources. Those are the things that lower and prevent crime. So if your goal is to stop the crime from happening, then surveillance isn't the tool you're looking for. If your goal is to throw more bodies into prisons, surveillance may be helpful for that. A lot of times, a lot of the tools are not even as helpful as their vendors would lead you to believe. But at the end of the day, what they don't do is is address the issues that create crime. And so to circle it back to your question, I think that a lot of police departments are being convinced by vendors that, you know, grabbing onto the newest, you know, sexiest, if you will, surveillance technology will be the thing that they need to do to push themselves over that line. Very often it ends up not being the case, but it certainly isn't the case of preventing the crime.
Just two things that I would want to add to those great comments. One is, you know, on the point of what Nash was just talking about, you know, about the claims that vendors use to convince municipalities to squander money on this technology. You know, the problem is, and the Williams case, Robert Williams's case brings us out too, is that, well, you buy a shoddy technology, guess what it leads to? It leads to shoddy investigations because it creates this confirmation bias. I mean, one of the things that wasn't covered in the video, but that is a part of the Robert Williams story is, so technically the DPD conducted an investigation to confirm that facial recognition match. Here's what they did. They went and got an employee who worked for the security company that Shinola hired to look at the security footage and do a 6-pack lineup against a photo of Mr. Williams and 5 other random Black people that they'd chosen to put in the lineup. And guess what? Mr. Williams was the one who looked most like the guy out of those 6 because they picked, you know, a computer roughly picked him. And this person wasn't even a witness. And the point is, you know, there's a confirmation bias once the technology tells you that something's right, that rather than improving the investigation, actually, you know, works in the exact opposite direction. And anybody who doubts that, I ask you to think about the last time you turned the wrong way because Google Maps told you to, even when you knew Google Maps was wrong. And I guess the other thing I would want to say is, you know, when I think about what's called for here, you know, as a remedy, what municipalities should be doing to be fixing this, and as folks here are thinking about, you know, advocating for a ban, I think it's really critical that, you know, this technology is being used at multiple steps in the state. And so, you know, it's all well and good for a municipality to say, we're not going to waste our money on buying this technology. And that's a good first step. But if your police department can just turn around and send the photos to the Michigan State Police and get the Michigan State Police to do their dirty work for them, you haven't really solved the problem. You've just squeezed some toothpaste around a tube. And so, you know, I think in thinking about what a ban needs to look like, it needs to be a ban that prohibits, you know, city officials from using this technology. And there was a comment, by the way, about corporations, and I'm all for trying to go that big as well. But limiting my comments for the moment just to the government perspective, you know, to say like our police aren't going to use this technology, our you know, health officials aren't going to use this technology, and they're not going to ask somebody else to do it for them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, you know, it's important as we're talking about this to kind of be able to address some of the, you know, and debunk some of these things that might come up, right? And so some things that I heard is that it's offered as really a false solution. And so to be aware of those things, to also recognize the role that really capitalism plays in this kind of thing, right? Because it is something to be sold. And there's a big business, right, in this field. And I think that we need to really pull back the sheets on that more and more. So I heard that. And then also just thinking about how technology, the use of the technology can actually add to bias as opposed to take away, which sometimes people think that like the technology is what's going to get in the way of the bias of the humans. And so, but that in fact, it actually can help elevate and actually create this false sense of rightness to the bias in a way too. So the next question I'll ask, and then before we jump to questions from the audience, is around accountability. And so as we think about these kind of technologies, you know, a lot of times, you know, even the folks that we in our government, our elected officials, don't necessarily know when the police are using it, as we saw happen here in Ann Arbor, and thinking about how do we then hold people accountable to the use of this? A lot of times it kind of can sneak in. I saw this happening where I live in Ypsilanti, right, where it wasn't a conversation that the community was leading about bringing this into the community, but it could have just as easily just slipped through. So how do we build in that accountability, and like what kind of organizing can happen to help us do that?
I'll start off. So I think, you know, when we're talking about face surveillance technology, I think that for the reason that we've mentioned before, like the fact that there is no way for, especially when it pertains to government use of the technology, there is no responsible government use of face surveillance technology, right? And so that's why, you know, we're saying there's banned government use of face surveillance technology. I do think that you additionally need to have a conversation around, you know, how are we making sure that the community has a voice and that there is a systems of accountability for, you know, the other decisions that we make around balancing, you know, this idea of public safety versus the idea of, you know, protecting, you know, civil liberties and human rights, right? And so one of the ways, and I kind of spoke to it a little bit earlier, is that, you know, more than a dozen cities have adopted a model that, you know, the ACLU, EFF, Crypto Party Harlem, a number of organizations, Oakland Privacy, have been working on since 2016, which is the community control over police surveillance ordinances. And what those do is, again, so what they do, far too often it's just the vendor is the only expert that's involved in the decision, and there's an agency executive that decides, you know, we're going to take this new technology, and a lot of times no elected officials are not aware that the technology is being used, community members are not aware that the technology is being used. There's an ineffective or not a responsible use policy, or there's no use policy. There's been no study to figure out, you know, what are the ways that, exactly as you mentioned, Desiree, that this technology might exacerbate existing biases in our communities. So what community control over police surveillance ordinances do, and the ACLU has an excellent model for them, is they require that before any surveillance technology is adopted, that there be a use policy that's made public, and that the public has an opportunity to review the use policy and to weigh in before the legislative body, not the agency executive, but, you know, the city council, or if it's or any county, it might be the board of supervisors, whatever that local legislative body is, makes the decision on whether that use policy is the proper, first of all, whether that technology is actually going to do what it says it's going to do, and whether the use of it, the cost, both financially and to civil liberties, is justified by the promise of the technology, right? And so, and if they do, and if they say that, if they find that there is no other cheaper solution or solution that's going to have less impact on essential human rights, then does this use policy protect those human rights in the best way that we can? Does the disparate impact show that they've taken the appropriate steps to make sure that any potential exacerbation of those harms is mitigated? And then ultimately, once it's gone through that process, they've had an opportunity to hear from the public and experts besides the vendor, that that legislative body decides. And then every year, given that they approve it, every year that agency has to come back and say, look, here's how we used it. Were there any ways we used it that violated the use policy that we put forward next year? What was it? Where did we take the proper steps to secure that information? Remember, especially when you're talking about biometric surveillance, I can't replace my face, right? And so that's why we have to get rid of face surveillance. But in all of these, if it's an ALPR, maybe I automated license plate reader, I might be able to get rid of my license, like to change my license plate if there's some particular harm or leak or what have you. But have they done the things that are that a responsible agency would take the appropriate steps to protect that information and make sure it doesn't fall into the hands of people who it's not intended to have access to it and that could potentially harm folks. And then every year, again, when they bring those policies back, it's an opportunity for then the community to be heard again, and for the legislative body not to just give them a blanket check to continue to use it indefinitely, but to make sure it's still appropriate and those balances are still being made appropriately. And then when we talk, and for enforcement, again, for accountability, you actually need enforcement. And so the best of them, and I would say almost all of them, have strong private rights of action. And so that means that any member of the community, you don't have to prove that you've been harmed by the technology, but any member of the community can bring litigation forward to hold the city and the agency accountable if that policy is not being followed appropriately. And so that empowers anyone in the community. And we fight strongly for something that's called fee shifting. So I'm not independently wealthy, right? And it shouldn't just be the EFFs and the ACLUs that can enforce it, right? Like any member of the community should be able to enforce it. So with fee shifting, it means that if I, as a person of modest means, are able to identify and convince an attorney that we will prevail in showing that the policy has been violated, that then the city will have to pay the legal fees, and that way I can actually get an attorney that's going to represent me, even if even if I don't have 20,000, 30,000, however much money in the bank to prove to the attorney that he's going to get that he will get compensated for or he or she will be compensated for their time, because they know that if we prevail, that the city will compensate the attorney that represented the person for the time that they had to take out to enforce the ordinance.
I'm going to echo and support everything that Nash just said. The other thing I think it's important to think about when we're talking about accountability is also talking about alternatives. So a lot of times the pushback that I've heard from DPD as an example is, well, what would you do in its place, right? Like, you want to abolish the police, you want to divest, you just want to have people running around, there's lawlessness in the streets, then, why would you do that? How are you going to keep people safe? There are plenty of alternative models to policing. There are plenty of alternative models that support community-led safety. Do not let people tell you that they don't exist. I promise you that they do. If you want to learn more about them, ask me and I will drop some links there. I saw somebody, this chat, I don't know if y'all paying attention to this chat, it's going crazy. People talk about the 1033 program. And that's like a whole other layer and level that we can talk about when we talk about the militarization of police and the connection from the federal government to local LEAs, law enforcement agencies, and the incentivization that they give for the use of a lot of these tools and programs. But I think one of the main pillars and something that we practice with both BLM and the Detroit Safety Team is the building of a new model, the building of these alternatives that remove the need for reliance on this system. When we want to talk about accountability, let's talk about making these systems obsolete. Let's talk about making the need for this current model of policing, that's in justice system, for the carceral system, obsolete in its nature. When we focus our energies there, then I think we end up building something and crowding out the inequity.
To just briefly tack on, I mean, Nash, you stole a lot of my thunder on pushing the CCOPS model bill that really is I think an important concept to make sure this stuff doesn't slide by. I mean, the Detroit City Council, several councilors claimed that they didn't even know that they were voting for the first authorization of facial recognition technology in Detroit. And some of those folks I'll take at their word, because this summer they then voted against renewing the funding. Some of them I won't, because then they voted to renew the funding. So I think that's a great step, although it needs to be joined with people power and grassroots engagement as well. That's really all I'll say there. Open it up for the other questions.
And if I can close it and tie those two things together, I mentioned, I raised my hand earlier when you said, who's an abolitionist, right? I should say I am. EFF is not an abolitionist organization. And so one of the things that I have like really like I want to really strongly like lift up is the fact that we need long and short-term strategies, right? We need to stop the bleeding as we're fighting for larger systemic change, right? And so I think that's really where like the things that John is speaking to, and the solutions like CCOPS ordinances, like how do we utilize and make sure that we're working within the opportunities that we have to stop the bleeding and the harm in our community every day while we do that longer term systemic change strategy shifting, right? And like system change.
So that triggered one more thing for me, which is I think just educating folks about what's happening is so important. When I talk about this issue in Michigan, like as in many states, most people don't know that when they get a driver's license or a state issued ID that their face is going in the database and that they are now in every criminal lineup that a facial recognition scan runs. Like that is not a fact that most Michiganders understand. In my experience, I think people in the know who worry about these issues every day do, and it scares them when they do. Most people don't know about the false identifications, and that's why we're trying to make that well known. And most people haven't thought about what that means. The sort of the Robert Williams story is it shows why this technology is dangerous when it doesn't work, but they then haven't gone to think about what's dangerous about this technology when it does work. What about the Baltimore police using it to surveil racial justice protesters after the death of Freddie Galvis? Thousands and thousands of hours of footage were taken of the protests in Detroit, this past summer, and all of that could now be being run through facial recognition as well.
Yeah, this leads into as I'm looking at some of the questions from the audience. One of the questions is, what do people advocating for or writing a municipal facial recognition ban need to consider? Are there specific uses that need to be called out that might not be obvious?
I'm going to be transparent. I missed the very first part of the question, if you wouldn't mind.
What do people advocating for or writing a municipal facial recognition ban need to consider? Are there specific uses that need to be called out that might not be obvious?
But I'll jump in and say that I think there are no uses of space surveillance by government that should be authorized. We need flat bans on government use of face surveillance. I think in order to do that, there's a couple of things that we do need to think about as we're moving them forward. And a couple I've spoken to already, but I'll just say them again because as a trainer, I know sometimes you have to, you need those multiple impressions, right, for folks to for the ideas to really sink in and become what's the word? The word skipping right now, but for folks to just absorb them. But first of all, it's how we define the technology, right? And so first of all, defining the technology really effectively. I've seen recently there have been both by corporations and some law enforcement embracing of using the technology in ways that don't identify, and actually a lot of the law enforcement uses the technology, the way law enforcement often uses it is that it doesn't say, you don't put the image in and then it says this is the person, right? What it actually often will say is there's a different score for different people, right? And so to say that it will to word it in a way that takes account of the fact that often the way it's used by law enforcement will not be to identify a single person, but to cluster images of folks. So being really intentional about how you're defining the technology so that it will account for all of the ways that face surveillance and face scans and face templates are being used. Next, I spoke a little bit earlier to enforcement. So making sure that there is that private right of action so that it's not just, so that an individual does not have to prove that they've been personally harmed. It's very, very difficult to prove because of the way surveillance technologies work. And the reason like face surveillance, I'll give you an example of like why face surveillance is so scary. We would never, I feel comfortable in saying this. I doubt anyone on this call would really like be cool with like being forced to wear a name tag on your clothing, right? So that anytime a police officer wanted to walk up to you, they could see who you are, where you live, what your name is, who you're associated with. We would never give in to that. We would never give in. We would never accept a change in policy that said, a police officer doesn't need any reasonable cause or or suspicion to ask you to identify yourself as you're walking down the street. We would never accept that. But you know what? That's actually even less intrusive or invasive than face surveillance, because at least you would know what was happening, right? At least you could call attention to it, right? With face surveillance, it's not just one individual. That cop could maybe stop one person. 500 people, 1,000 people could at the same time, without their awareness, be constantly being identified. The perpetual lineup that Georgetown Center for Privacy and Technology speaks to, and so. Therefore, it's really difficult for any one individual that's been impacted to prove that they've been personally impacted. So having a private right of action that says that any member of the community that's able to show that the ban has been violated can take enforcement action. And then obviously, and then the other thing I spoke to earlier again is making sure that you have that fee shifting. So it's not just wealthy individuals. It's not just well-funded nonprofits that can enforce it. It's every member of the community, if they're able to show someone who can give them legal support that they are likely to prevail in showing that the ordinance has been violated, that they will be able to take that action. So really defining the technology well, and having strong enforcement are two of the major things that you need to make sure that you're building into your system.
Phil, I saw you were going to come off mute and answer. Can I ask you to also add to that? There's because someone was also asking a question about thinking about if there's examples of municipalities that might have been pushing to not only ban within the city, but also to think about uses for apartment buildings or businesses or other things like that. So if you can include that just in your answer.
Let me kick that last additional question back to Nash, because I feel like he would probably know better than I would.
Well, I can say that we know that in Brooklyn, New York, for instance, there was a landlord that was trying to put in a system in the Atlantic Towers. That was trying to put in a system that would replace a key fob system with a face recognition system for entering the building. There's lots of reasons to be concerned there. Lots of potential for biometric data collection without consent. To my knowledge, there has not been a law passed to prevent that, but they were able to get the landlord to back off of that program. Portland, Oregon has passed a ban. They have two bans. They have one on face recognition technology, and they have another by government agencies. They have another on use of face recognition technology in places of public accommodation. And so that could anywhere. Think about ADA, anywhere that needs to be Americans with Disability Act compliant would also not be able to use face recognition in those spaces. EFF, and our allies land on different sides of the spectrum here. EFF's position when it comes to private use of face recognition and all biometric data is not a ban in that instance, because again we believe that there are different impacts there, and we want to make sure that individuals are empowered to use technology and to innovate in ways that empowers the individual. So what we fight for there is things like the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, right? And the Biometric Information Privacy Act of Illinois, and there is a federal bill that has not been passed yet, but would make a federal version of the Biometric Information Privacy Act. It says that anytime you want to collect someone's biometric information, be it their face or their gait or their iris scan, that you need to do some really important things. First of all, you need to inform them in writing that you're going to do it. You need to tell them, what you're doing it for, who it's going to be shared with, how long you're going to retain it, and how it's being secured, right? And then you need to get written consent from them. So written consent from them or their legal representative to do it for that purpose, for that period of time, and for who you're going to share it with. So it's not sufficient to be able to say, well, you came into our convenience store and we had a sign outside the convenience store that said, if you enter here, you are consenting to face recognition. That is not consent. Consent in the way it's defined by Illinois' Biometric Information Privacy Act is really that. It is written, informed consent. And that would address a lot of, for instance, the Atlantic Towers example. If I am coming to visit someone, right, and you don't have you do not have written consent for me to use this technology, then you wouldn't be able to use it there, right? If I am, if I'm walking into a restaurant and they want to be able to use it they've decided that they want to keep track of all their clients in the restaurant, so that they can make sure that they have a record of who was there at what time, so they can give them their bonus star or whatever other reason it might be. That would not be able to do it, because how would you do that effectively for every single individual that walked in that space, having a record of written consent from each one of those individuals? So in a lot of the uses of corporate or private use of the technology would be eliminated, but it would still allow for the fact that, if John and I say, we want to go and we want to demonstrate how harmful government use of face recognition technology is. Actually, ACLU did an example a few years ago at in Congress, right? They took a number of Congress members, and with their consent, subjected them to the to Amazon's recognition system, and they were able to show that 28 of them were misidentified as being folks who had been convicted of crimes. So if we wanted to run a demonstration with people's consent to use it for that purpose, and we said, hey, as soon as we're done with this demonstration, we're going to end it, then we would be able to do that. If there were a ban on private use of the technology, we would be barred from doing that. So those are just one reason that we fight for banning government use of technology, because the harms are inseparable from the government use of the technology, and really strong written consent requirements for any kind of private use of the technology.
Thanks. Now,
So-
Phil, you can say what you wanted to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was originally going to say, and what I will still say is, Nash covered a lot of the ground there about what I think is important, but to reiterate one point from earlier, I think it's just absolutely critical that that any bill that's a ban be one that doesn't allow squeezing of the toothpaste tube. So it has to say, not just that we're not going to invest and purchase this technology ourselves, but that we will not use it or cause it to be used by any other third party, including state or federal agencies. So that means we're not going to send our photos off to ICE so that ICE can use them to track down immigrant communities in our jurisdiction. So that's, you've really got to cut it off so that you're not sharing photos with people who do, and you're not asking someone else to go use the technology. So I think cutting that cord at both ends and being like, this is a safe space. Is really critical. The other thing, John Nash is right that we don't want carve-outs, period. But just to highlight one that I think this temptation arises for policymakers, and it needs to be pushed back against. And James Craig gets a lot of mileage out of arguing about like this in Detroit. Is they're like, well, shouldn't we maybe save it for just the really violent crimes, or the scariest crimes? And I'll tell you what my client, what Robert Williams says about that when he's asked, which is, thank God what I was falsely accused of by a computer was stealing some watches instead of raping or shooting somebody, because I definitely wouldn't have gotten out of jail 30 hours later for doing nothing wrong. I definitely wouldn't have gotten out of jail when the cops realized, 10 hours after the cops realized that that the photos didn't match. And he could have been pressured into taking a plea bargain, because of the risks of having to go to trial on something like that. And so, I think that has to be pushed back on. If this technology isn't good enough to use it for other things, why is it good enough to risk somebody's life in prison over it? Not that anybody should ever be facing life in prison, but that's the system we have at the moment. And then, I think there's something that was in Nash's comments about the sort of private space, but, I think requiring disclosure whenever the technology is used is critical, in the criminal space especially. One of the things that's remarkable about Mr. Williams' story is that he actually found out that this technology was used to identify him, because the cops basically slipped up and said, oh, I guess the computer got it wrong. That doesn't happen to most people. Most people aren't even in a position of knowing this technology has been used against them. So requiring disclosure when the technology is used is, I think, critical as well.
Thank you so much, y'all. This has been such a great conversation. I appreciate everything you all have brought to it. I want to invite Molly on to talk a little bit about kind of how folks can connect with what we're doing here, because we wanted to have a chance to kind of, for folks to kind of like do a little action planning, because it's so important that we don't just kind of talk about it, but that we be about it. And so, so Molly, if you want to just come on and kind of share a little bit with us, that'd be great.
Sure. And I think since I'm spotlighting, I have to spotlight myself. Here I am. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Des, and thank you to all of our speakers. This has been great. So yeah, we're having this conversation here tonight, partly because we know that there's discussion happening in Ann Arbor about banning facial recognition, and we know there's the ongoing fight happening in Detroit, and I think a larger conversation in the whole region. And so one thing we're really thinking about is what are the next concrete steps? And so I know we have a few council members here tonight, and I know they're looking at putting together what a ban might be. And so I want to make sure that they are hearing support from the public, that this is worth their time to work on, that it's important to a lot of folks, and that we want to have a ban that's really robust, and that the regulations that we put in place are really going to help make our community safer, as we've been hearing today. So I dropped the link, which all of you have probably seen because this is where you signed up for the event today, but you didn't necessarily sign up for our emails. So if you go to that website, banthescana2.com, you'll have a chance to sign up for our email alerts, and that will be a chance to get action alerts as this starts moving through the city, as maybe city council is considering a ban or it's up for a vote. We'll let you know and say, here, this is a great opportunity to email your city council members, maybe to plan to speak at council, even if that's something you've never done before. We'll probably share some information about how you can do that, so that you can really get involved and engaged and help move this ban forward, because it is a really important step in making Ann Arbor safer. And then thinking a little bit longer term, we want to talk about how we might make this happen in Ypsilanti, in Washtenaw County, and maybe even in the state of Michigan.
Yes, thank you. So I'll just let folks know we're going to have we were going to break out. So if you would like to stay around, we'll have a very, very short breakout, because I'm sure you will agree that the conversation was so rich that I didn't really want to cut it short. But if you are interested in breaking out for a little bit, you can go ahead and start the process of renaming yourself by adding a 1 or a 2. So if you put 1, you'll break out into a conversation with Molly to talk more about what she was just saying in terms of what it would look like for the work that we're doing to ban facial recognition technology in Ann Arbor specifically. And if you put 2, then you will break out in a conversation with myself and Natalie Holbrook with Liberate, Don't Incarcerate, to talk about organizing in other parts of the county. And so you can go ahead and start doing that as we close with our panelists. I just want to thank each of you again, and for sharing with us. I also want to go ahead and thank all of the co-sponsors for the event. So Bindi Arc Jewish Action in Ann Arbor was one of the sponsors, Crypto Party in Ann Arbor, Wicker, Liberate, and the Interfaith Council for Justice. So thank you for all of that. And then I think that we will just get ready to break out for the last little bit of time. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to everyone who watches this on the live stream. Feel free to connect with us and to connect in to all the resources that have been shared tonight. If you sign up to join the email list, you will get notices and information, right? So it's a good way to just kind of keep in touch with these efforts as we grow them. The panelists, thank you again. If folks don't want to stay around for the breakouts, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.